if we are going to advanced buildings, we have to talk about the experience, of course, from within, but also the impact of the building, the footprint, and the impact on the personal health and well-being.
Welcome back to Heja Framtiden, the Swedish podcast on the future. My name is Christian von Essen. I'm sitting here in my kitchen studio in Stockholm, and I am recording over link via Zoom with Lone Feifer. Hello, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We're going to talk about sustainable building today, urban planning maybe in a way, and what we are missing to reach a more sustainable future in that areas. So you work with a company called Velux. Let's start there. What kind of company is it, and what's the story behind it?
Velux is an old Danish industry, actually founded in 1941, where the founder, called Willum Kan Rasmussen, he invented the roof window, or rather he invented how to use the room under the roof. And how can you use, it was during Second World War times, where there was scarcity on a number of things, also living space. So he, in fact, saw that the rooms that were needed, and you could actually utilize the rooms in the roof, the attics, by bringing in daylight and fresh air. So to do that, he invented the Velux roof window, which takes in daylight and provides the room with fresh air. So that's what you need to be able to inhabit the room under the roof. And it's grown since then quite significantly. Quite early it went into Germany and France, the big European markets. And today we are a global company with nearly 40 subsidiaries around the world, selling everything about daylight and fresh air through the roof. That is what we still do. And we employ 11,000 employees. In total, I work in the headquarters in Denmark and have been working with Velux since 1999. So it's quite some years.
Oh, really?
I've specialized in sustainable buildings since 2008 and working as responsible for this strategy in Velux today. And I'm an architect of profession originally myself.
Yeah, and so you sit on many different boards and associations and confederations of many kinds.
Yes, I take, I take pride in using my agency and also my background as an architect to be able to develop how our next generations can get the best possible conditions through their education, but also how the profession as such can be having a voice. I think it's important, so I'm on the board of the Architects Association. I'm also very interested in tech and design and innovation, working with in a number of boards in that dimension as well. And then we are in Velux, we are proud founders of the Active House Alliance, which works, it's a global NGO working to promote sustainable buildings with a holistic approach globally.
Yeah, in Sweden it's called Active Hus, right? Well, it's very energy efficient. Is that the whole philosophy?
That is definitely the point of departure. And there is a slight tendency, or there has been in the building industry, or talking about sustainable buildings, to only talk about the 3 dark months and how much heat will either a building component or a house or a piece of a wall lose during winter. But obviously we need the buildings to support our health and well-being the other seasons of the year. And that is actually where you can begin to talk about sustainability to support the more holistic and global framework that a building is able to provide you with, and also the indoor climate, because it's so significant and important for how you perform. For instance, in the bedroom, if you have a poor indoor climate, you will not sleep well, you will not have a good next day, neither in terms of cognitive nor creative performance.
What is the problem with how our buildings are designed and constructed today and historically?
Well, several, but two of the key things is how we value buildings. We have a very poor valuation system for buildings. We talk about the cost and the energy loss. That is some hard parameters that you are able to use. But I could take an example, Christian. If you imagine yourself going to buy a new flat or a house, and you go and you see it, read about the price, you know where it is, you know the postal code, you can see the energy bill, the taxation, all these figures. Would you still go and see the house? I guess you would. You would not buy it without being there. And then entering a space and feeling the space, imagining how it is to live there, and if you could maybe make a big investment and buy this house or flat, you are actually left to some discussions with your intuition or your gut feelings. But it is possible to make quite advanced and good qualitative statements about how good, for instance, a building's indoor climate is, or say, how is the carbon footprint, and will you have to spend a lot of carbon keeping it up, or is it more efficient, not just for the 3 dark months, but also in general? So we are a bit behind in terms of the, I would say, currency that we have, because everybody understands what things cost. When you go to the supermarket and you pick up, it could be meat or it could be pasta or some vegetables, you make an evaluation. You sort of consider, what is the price compared to the quality? And you have this feeling of, is this good? Should I have quite a lot of this, or maybe not so much? And I will allow myself to have a good piece of meat, maybe once in a while. But we lack a little bit this sensibility towards buildings, but also being more critical towards what buildings are. Also considering how much they mean to our general well-being and our wallet. It's an investment, also important. So we need to focus a lot more on this. And in some ways, the current energy crisis is helping us to put a focus on it, but maybe not all the right focus areas.
Yeah, there are a lot of hidden problems that slowly reveal themselves once you live there. But is there a question about transparency, regulations?
Regulations is something that has to be in place, because you cannot expect all stakeholders to have a conscience and to follow that. Maybe not even social responsibility. And for those who don't have it by themselves, you have to have regulations. So you have the lowest common denominator will always be the regulations. And here we are actually facing in the whole building industry a huge challenge for 2024, when the so-called EU taxonomy will come into place for how you can invest in buildings. It's a kind of a tool that the Commission has introduced because they want to influence that as many buildings are renovated as possible, because we are in need of that. And that for that they have introduced what they call the Green Deal for the renovation wave. And the Green Deal is then behind that is the EU taxonomy, which will, putting it very simply, favorize sustainable buildings to get a better interest and to earn you more return on investment for being exactly that, sustainable. But the documentation part of that is huge, and that's scaring everybody away, because just documenting is not a value in itself. You still have to have this quality ability in place, like talking about the meat or the rice in the supermarket. You can see what it costs and you can see the nutrition and you can sort of have a feeling of it, but it is you making the judgment. So this judgment part, the very personal part, is probably lacking.
Aren't they also at the same time highly regulating the phrasing, the words you can use to describe something, if it's sustainable or green? And it's going to be a lot more difficult to greenwash your marketing.
Yeah, that would be good. We're starting to see some very interesting aspects here. I think you in Sweden have the same as we do, an ombudsman. taking care of consumers' interests here.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah, and a small year ago, it was noted by the ombudsman, where there was a verdict, or it's a formulation that is put out on what you can call sustainable. And that was really, really helpful. So without documentation or even regulation in place, it was stated that if you call something as a company, if you call something, market it as sustainable, you have to account for the life cycle assessment or the carbon footprint over the whole life cycle of the product or the clothes or the building, etc. And that meant a big difference, because all of a sudden, a lot of companies started removing what they just called sustainable, because it's such a broad term. So that was interesting to see how that sort of changed very quickly. And the consumers, you could see here, they were also like, you call it sustainable? Can you show us the footprint?
Yeah, in Sweden we often use the word klimatsmart. Something is climate smart. If it's just slightly less bad than something else, it's suddenly very climate smart. And so that's also a word that I hope we'll use less in the future. How do you work with sustainability at Velox? You have something called Build for Life. Is that a sustainability initiative from your side?
Yes, it is, exactly. We work with, we have introduced a sustainability strategy in 2020 called It's Our Nature. And here we describe all the goals that we have and what we want to achieve on sustainability in terms of the company we are and what we promote, and have inclusive and diverse workspaces, and a lot of what I call actually hygiene targets, what every company should consider. Then we have a next ambition level, which is our products, how they contribute and how we work with specific targets in this. And then we have our pioneer level, where we have 3 targets, and they aim at the company accounting for our complete historic carbon footprint that we have neutralized in a cooperation with WWF. Then the next one is for our products. How can they be with a 50% lower footprint in 2030? So in 10 years, we halve the footprint of our products. And number 3 is Build for Life, which is the buildings in which our products are mounted, because no Velux window is sold without that it will be installed into a building, giving daylight and fresh air and meaning to a room or a space.
And how much can you influence the buildings that your products are used in?
We can influence it in several ways. What we do here with the Pioneer target is that we, first of all, set the ambition to build for life. So not only for the 3 dark months where we are now, but for the whole year, the whole day, and all kinds of life. Very often in the building industry, it's buildings do not account for the people who are going to live in them or work or go to school in buildings. It's a bit ironic. Why do you build buildings? You build them to use them, not just to build the building and then it's standing there. And there's a big gap in understanding on the construction to the operations of buildings. So we'd like to create that bridge and to have the operations, so the full life cycle of buildings inside. And we have to pull and actually push for the development in particular, and to lead the way. We have defined a lighthouse project that we call Living Spaces, which is a housing concept where we have looked at every component of a house. How can you make that more sustainable? So either it's the construction or the cladding or the way you do the ventilation, or the automation. And here we have just published the result, which is that we have the lowest footprint on any building project in Denmark, which is 3.8 kilo CO2 equivalent per square meter per year. And here you might say, what should I think about that? But this is the new currency. This is the CO2 equivalence by which we should judge buildings. And we have a very ambitious building regulations in Denmark. And there the top limit or the benchmark is 12 kilos CO2. So we are 3 times better than that.
So how can your products help improve sustainability? I mean, one thing is that you produce with 50% less carbon emissions, but do you claim that your products actually make the building more sustainable in contributing to better air quality and sunlight, for example?
Yes, they do, but it's not. It's only part of what makes a building sustainable. We think there's a lot of aspects like the good air quality and lots of daylight at the right times and doses, but also the quality of the design in the building, the community, the more urban context of the buildings. What we all realized during Corona, the building in itself is not necessarily what's important. It's more important how it's contexted. And then, of course, how can it adapt also over time? And how can it be affordable? With our products, we can influence parts of this. In any building, we are part of it, but we are a smaller component. And everybody in the building industry is a smaller component because it's so fragmented. It's not like cars where you have 7, 8, 9 major brands. Buildings are not made that same way. So the understanding of a building, and if you want to advance and change things and create real innovation, you have to do it in the same system, which represents the way the buildings are made. It's a systemic change of the whole building. So it's a lot of dialogue with stakeholders and partners and clients and developers and other producers, architects, engineers.
I assume that this is an ongoing educational challenge for the industry?
Very much so. We have been making demonstration buildings like this for almost 20 years. And we can see that talking about our products has its own right, but it also has its limitation. If we are going to advance buildings, we have to talk about the experience, of course, from within, but also the impact of the building, the footprint, and the impact on the personal health and well-being. And that is not only our products. We play one role, but there are so many other aspects and programming and design parameters that play a big role.
Can you assess a project that you're going to be a part of and say that, well, we don't actually think that this is going to be as sustainable as we would like, so we don't want to be a part of this, we're pulling out?
Well, our windows are installed and designed and programmed by what you call the professionals in the building industry. So it could be an installer or a contractor, architect, and an engineer. They specify it, and they actually are the ones taking the, responsibility for the complete footprint. We haven't got that big a say. We are subject to their best judgment, and that's also why we need and want to be in a dialogue with them.
You mentioned systemic change. Do you see a need for new kinds of collaborations in this sector, bringing in other areas or sciences into the mix?
Definitely. I mean, we cannot continue building like we do. And it's very clear that we cannot continue on the same path as we are on today. We have to do something different, which is very difficult for a very conservative industry, because actually you're expected to provide buildings which are just as good as the one you provided yesterday. So how can we bring about that change? I think the next generations have a very different way of thinking from which we can learn a lot. Then we also need to make way and onboard startups, the whole innovation, tech, combined design industry. They come with a different approach, which is also a good way of thinking. But the key enabler is that it is not done, the usual way or only the new way. You have to have that dialogue. So it's the collaboration, and that happens very early in the programming stage. That's the decisive factor.
And you coming from an architect background, what is your message to new architects?
In many ways, I'm concerned about the future, but looking at the students which are now in architect schools, I'm very confident that they will take a completely different responsibility than, well, my generation, your generations. When I ask them, what is it you want to do with your education? Do you want to come out and work in an architect office and do big, important buildings, which is the typical sort of role model for students? They say, no, they don't want to. They want to make a difference. And it's not about the product, it's about the impact. So on this part, I'm very confident, but I'm uncertain again how this can be mixed with business as usual, which is of course still the very predominant power factor in the building industry. So we are depending on both that the industry, as we are representing, realizes the challenges and leans into a new way of solving this, and then onboarding the next generations in a way where they can actually make a difference from day one, not first having to learn for 5 or 10 years.
I usually ask, what's your best tip for making the world a better place in the future?
To be a critical consumer. I think we all have a responsibility. I don't believe in pointing fingers, because everything we do every day in our lives is a choice. We choose to do things. We might say that we feel pressured or pushed, or we normally do, and so on. But when it comes to it, it's a choice. So we all have a choice as to what we buy, what we eat, how we live, how we travel. And I don't want to point fingers and say that you cannot fly or anything like that. But you can choose what you do with your yearly carbon budget. How do you choose to spend it, and maybe get a feeling for how much is the weightings. That's this new currency that I'm trying to call carbon.
Yeah, so we all have some kind of agency in creating the future, both for ourselves and as a collective.
We do. We all have a responsibility. We cannot leave it to all the politicians or just the climate activists who are pushing really hard. We all have to consider what we do, and then do it critical and consciously.
Do you have any good reading tips or podcast tips?
If you are interested in sustainable buildings and climate and architecture, there is a very nice podcast series by the Architects Journal, which is called Climate Champions. That really, it's a bit nerdy and quite fairly long, but you can of course choose the topics that you want. But for professionals, I think it's one of the few that really gets around the topics. It's edited by Hattie Hartman, and it's delightful to listen to several of the series. Fairly UK based, but then again, UK is a proud architecture nation.
Great. Who do you think I should interview? And
you have, of course, done Greta Thunberg.
Not yet. Her fame kind of blew up when I started this podcast, so she was difficult to get hold of.
Yes, I can imagine. Maybe I would aim at young professionals, some of the young professionals who have just recently graduated and who are going to employ and deploy their agency within how we work with climate. I can think of many names, but it depends a bit on the topic. But I think we need to listen to next generations much more. I just think when it comes to buildings, which is my field, it's difficult to talk to the ones who are 17, 18, 20 now. I'm more thinking about the ones who have graduated, been to school recently, and just have met the real world and just starting to deploy what they want to do.
Great. Thank you so much, Lone Feifer, for joining Heja Framtiden.
Thank you. And thank you for the invitation. Great to be here.
Yeah. Velux.com, and the sustainability initiative is called buildforlife.velux.com, if you want to check that out. So it's a kind of benchmark for how we can think about building a more sustainable future. Hejaframtiden.se for more information about this podcast and my other projects with lectures and books and magazines and stuff like that. My name is Christian von Essen. Thank you so much for listening.